the founder of Conservative Home. Timothy, thank you so much indeed for your time. I'd just like to go back to Liz Truss and her premiership, if you don't mind. Matthew Parris, you'll know him well, former Conservative MP, now one of the country's top political commentators. He was on the radio a couple of days ago talking about Liz Truss, and he said Liz Truss has a pinhead for a brain. And then he tried to explain how she became Prime Minister. What does it say about the Conservative Party that Liz Truss actually became the leader of the United Kingdom?
Well, good afternoon. I wouldn't quite go as far as my former Times colleague, Matthew, to describe Liz Truss's intellect in those terms. That is a pejorative expression that I wouldn't use. But the problem, I think, why the Conservative Party got into this position was, rather than choosing someone that we believe should be the Prime Minister, the party's been in power so long, it's almost decided it's voting against people. There's more hate than love. There's more opposition than support in how they are voting. So the reason why I think Liz Truss triumphed in the last round of voting was more people disliked Rishi Sunak, partly because in the view of his critics, he'd stabbed Boris Johnson in the back and seated him from being Prime Minister. And so there was more people voting against Rishi Sunak than for Liz Truss. And that's partly why we got into the sad position we and the country are now in.
Timothy, I don't want to go into too much details of British politics, but one thing I think is worth impressing upon an international audience, which of course we have, is the importance of the position of the British Prime Minister to the international order. The Conservative Party, 65 years of rule in the past century, actually in any democracy in the world, it is the most successful political party. So it carries weight on the international stage. Do you purport to the theory that is growing that the Conservative Party has actually been hijacked by a group of political ideologues and extremely rich people who are financing right-wing think tanks? And this has taken a few decades, and that Liz Truss was actually their puppet.
I wouldn't go that far. I think it is fair to say that Liz Truss was definitely a free market campaigner. And the reason why her premiership came to an end so quickly was that she tried to introduce too many ideological tax cuts too quickly. Now, for many of your viewers, I suspect Margaret Thatcher is probably one of the best known British Prime Ministers of recent times. Margaret Thatcher has often sort of been compared to Liz Truss, but I'm old enough to remember Margaret Thatcher, and she actually was quite pragmatic. She didn't try and do everything all at once. She was quite careful in choosing when to pick her battles, whereas Liz Truss tried to do almost everything at once. A major spending programme on helping people pay their energy bills, a global problem at the moment, and cutting taxes, particularly for business and wealthier people. And it was too much, too quickly. And so I think it was more of an ideological disposition that she had, rather than somehow some form of corruption because she was bought by vested interests. That would certainly be my assessment.
Yeah, sure. There are some very, very respected analysts who have been putting these arguments forward about what's happened to that party in particular. Just finally, Timothy, I know you're a former advisor to Boris Johnson. I mean, the former Prime Minister is currently being investigated by Parliament about whether he misled the legislature and whether he indeed even possibly lied to Parliament. How can he possibly even be considering standing for Prime Minister again?
It's a very good question. And I think the Conservative Party, you've rightly described it as one of the most successful political parties in the world. But if you looked at current British opinion polls, the Conservative Party in one latest opinion poll is only on 14%, 14%, which would basically amount to electoral annihilation. And what Conservative MPs are doing, I think against normal grounds of rationality, they are reaching for someone potentially in Boris Johnson who won them the last general election. But you're quite right. He does face some very serious ethical questions. It's why his premiership came to an end 7 weeks ago. So if Tory MPs were to vote for him, and I think it's a 50-50 possibility at the moment, they really would be playing with fire.
Wow, 50-50 is pretty generous, I would have thought. Timothy, thank you so much indeed. Timothy Montgomerie speaking to us from Salisbury.